What if I told you that a simple lawn mowing job would lead to the most intense romance of my life? What started as routine yard work became an obsession that consumed my every thought. But there was something about this house, something about the mysterious man behind those always closed blinds that I couldn't shake. Little did I know, he was watching me too, and what happened next would change both our lives forever. My name is Marcus, and I've been running my landscaping business for 5 years now. I thought I'd seen every type of client: the perfectionist suburbanites, the lazy landlords, the elderly folks who just needed help. But nothing prepared me for the call I received on that Tuesday morning in late spring. I need someone to maintain my property on Maple Ridge Drive. The voice was soft, almost hesitant. Weekly service. The yard has been neglected. The address he gave me was in one of those quiet, tree-lined neighborhoods where houses sat back from the road like secrets waiting to be discovered. When I first pulled into the driveway of 1247 Maple Ridge, I felt a strange chill despite the warm afternoon sun. The house looked like it belonged in a Gothic novel, a beautiful Victorian home with dark green shutters. But something was off. Every curtain was drawn tight. Every blind was closed. The driveway showed no tire marks except for the faint impressions of what looked like grocery delivery trucks. Most telling of all, the grass was nearly knee-high, and the flower beds looked like they hadn't been touched in months. But here's where it gets interesting. As I unloaded my equipment, I felt eyes on me. You know that prickly sensation when someone's watching? I looked up at the second-floor windows and caught just the slightest movement, a curtain falling back into place. My client, whoever he was home, and he was watching. I spent 3 hours that first day just getting the grass to a manageable height. The physical work felt good, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Every 20 minutes or so, I'd catch a shadow moving past a window, or hear what sounded like footsteps on hardwood floors inside. When I finished, I knocked on the front door to let him know I was done. The door opened just wide enough for a hand to appear, an elegant, long-fingered hand that placed an envelope on the doorstep before quickly retreating. Inside was my payment in cash and a note in beautiful handwriting. Thank you. Same time next week? D. That was all I had to go on. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious house and its even more mysterious owner. Who was D? Why was he hiding? And why did I feel so drawn to find out? Now here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Week 2 brought the first real interaction. I was trimming the hedges near the front porch when I heard the soft creak of the front door opening. I turned, and for the first time, I saw him. David, as I would later learn his name, stood in the doorway like he was afraid to step outside. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his eyes that caught me. Deep brown, intelligent, but carrying a sadness that made my chest tighten. The hedges look good, he said quietly, his voice the same soft tone from the phone call. He was wearing a simple white button-down shirt and dark jeans, but somehow he made casual clothes look elegant. Thank you, I managed to say, suddenly very aware of my sweaty work clothes and dirt-stained hands. I was thinking about adding some color to the flower beds, maybe some seasonal plantings. He considered this, his eyes moving from the beds to my face, and then quickly away. What would you suggest? We talked for maybe 10 minutes about plants and seasonal care, but the entire time, I was hyper-aware of everything about him. The way he stayed carefully in the doorway, never stepping onto the porch. How his hands gripped the door frame, like he needed the support. The way his eyes would meet mine for a moment before darting away. When a neighbor's dog barked loudly nearby, David flinched and stepped back inside, so quickly it was like he'd never been there at all. That night, I found myself researching flowering plants I'd never bothered with before, planning elaborate garden designs for a client I'd spoken to for less than 15 minutes. Something was happening to me, and I wasn't sure I wanted to stop. This is just the beginning of Marcus and David's story, and I promise you, what happens next will completely surprise you. If you're enjoying this slow burn romance, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever felt an instant connection with someone you barely knew? Let me know. And if you want to see how this mysterious relationship unfolds, make sure you're subscribed because part 2 is coming soon. Week 3 was when everything changed. I had started arriving earlier, staying later, finding excuses to work in areas where I might catch another glimpse of David through windows. I felt like a teenager with a crush, and it was both thrilling and embarrassing. But David seemed to be growing bolder too. On Wednesday, when I was planting the new flowers we discussed, the front door opened and he actually stepped onto the porch. "They're beautiful," he said, looking at the bright yellow marigolds and deep purple pansies I'd arranged in the front bed. "They'll look even better in a few weeks when they fill in," I said, brushing soil off my hands. "You have good instincts for color." He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger and less guarded. "I used to paint," he said, then immediately looked like he regretted sharing that detail. "Used to? You stopped." David's expression shuddered again. Life got complicated. He paused, seemed to debate with himself, then added quietly, "I don't go out much anymore. Having someone else choose what makes the outside beautiful, it helps." There was a story there, and I wanted desperately to know it. But before I could respond, David was retreating back inside, leaving me with more questions and answers. But the real breakthrough came on Thursday. I was installing a small automatic watering system for the new plants when the sky opened up with one of those sudden spring thunderstorms. Within minutes, I was soaked to the skin, and the electrical components I was working with were in danger of being damaged. I was gathering everything up when the front door opened, and David's voice called out, "Bring the equipment inside." Quickly, for the first time, I crossed the threshold into David's world. The interior of the house was stunning. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, and artwork covering nearly every wall. But it was also clearly the home of someone who rarely had visitors. Books were stacked everywhere, empty coffee cups set on multiple surfaces, and the curtains were drawn so tight that even with lights on, everything felt muted and subdued. "Sorry about the mess," David said, helping me carry the electronic equipment to the kitchen. "I don't usually have people over." I finished gently. He nodded, looking embarrassed. "Not for a long time." We stood in his kitchen, both dripping rainwater on the floor, and I felt a shift in the energy between us. In his own space, David seemed more relaxed, but also more vulnerable. I could see details I'd missed outside. The way his hair curled slightly when wet, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the fact that his hand shook almost imperceptibly. "Can I ask you something?" I said carefully. David tensed, but nodded. "When's the last time you left this house?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. David looked away, running a hand through his damp hair. 14 months. He said so quietly I almost didn't hear him. 14 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. My heart broke a little at the precision of his count. Here's what I learned about David that changed everything I thought I knew. As the storm raged outside, David made tea and we sat in his living room, surrounded by his paintings, because they were everywhere, beautiful landscapes and portraits that took my breath away. He told me his story. "I was an art professor," he began, his voice steady but his hands wrapped tightly around his mug, "at the university downtown. I loved teaching, loved sharing art with students who were discovering their passion for the first time." He paused, looking at a painting of a busy cafe scene. I was also engaged. Her name was Sarah, and she was perfect, beautiful, ambitious, successful in her own career. Everyone said we were the ideal couple. But I could hear the but coming. The anxiety started small, David continued. Just little moments of panic in crowded spaces. Difficulty sleeping before big social events. Sarah was understanding at first, but as it got worse, she grew frustrated. She couldn't understand why I couldn't just get over it or think positive. I watched his face as he spoke, seeing the pain that was still fresh even over a year later. "The breaking point came at a faculty mixer," he said. "I had a full panic attack in front of my colleagues, my dean, everyone I worked with. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't function." Sarah was mortified. She said I was embarrassing her, that I needed to get professional help or she was leaving. "Did you get help?" I asked gently. David nodded. "I tried. Therapy, medication, everything the doctor suggested. But the anxiety kept getting worse. I couldn't handle being in classrooms full of students, couldn't manage faculty meetings. couldn't even go to the grocery store without feeling like I was going to pass out. He set down his teacup with shaking hands. Sarah left 6 months after the panic attack. Said she couldn't watch me waste my life anymore. The university put me on medical leave, which became permanent disability. And I just stopped going out, stopped trying, stopped believing that I could ever be normal again. The rain had stopped, but neither of us moved to acknowledge it. The only time I feel safe is here in this house, with my paintings and my books and no expectations from anyone, David finished. Until what? I prompted. He looked at me directly for the first time during the entire conversation. Until you started coming here, watching you work in the garden, seeing the yard come back to life. It's the first time in over a year that I felt hopeful. That's when I realized I was falling in love with him. What happened next surprised both of us. After that storm day conversation, everything changed between David and me. He started coming outside more often while I worked, bringing me water or iced tea, sometimes just sitting on the porch steps while I tended to plants. Our conversations grew longer and more personal. I learned that David had grown up in this house. It had been his grandmother's, and that he'd moved back after Sarah left because it was the only place he felt truly safe. I told him about my own journey, how I'd started the landscaping business after burning out from a high-pressure corporate job. You understand what it's like to start over, he said one afternoon as we sat together in the garden I created in his backyard. I do, I agreed. But David, you haven't started over yet. You've just paused. He was quiet for a long moment. What if I can't unpause? What if this is just who I am now? Then you're still worth knowing, I said without thinking, then immediately felt my face heat up at how that sounded. David stared at me. Marcus, I mean as a friend, I said quickly, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true anymore. But it was David who made the first move. The following week, while I was installing some solar lights along his garden path, David came outside and said, "Would you like to stay for dinner? I mean, I cook for one anyway, and you've been working all day." I'd been hoping for exactly that invitation for weeks, but now that it was offered, I felt nervous. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," David said firmly. "You're the first person I want to share a meal with in over a year." Dinner was simple, pasta with homemade sauce, and a salad from vegetables David grew in containers on his back porch. But it felt like the most important meal of my life. We talked about books, about travel dreams we both had, about the small daily rituals that kept us grounded. "Can I ask you something personal?" David said as we cleared the dishes. I nodded. "Why aren't you married? Or dating someone? You're..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You're exactly the kind of person people fall in love with." I felt my heart speed up. "I haven't met the right person," I said honestly. "I thought I had a couple times, but it never felt like this." "Like what?" This was the moment of truth. Like I could spend every day for the rest of my life just sitting in your garden, talking with you, and be completely happy. David went very still. We were standing in his kitchen, the dinner dishes forgotten, and the air between us felt charged with possibility. "Marcus," he said quietly, "I can't be what you need. I can't go out, can't meet your friends, can't be the partner someone like you deserves. What if all I need is exactly who you are right here?" I said, taking a step closer to him, and that's when he kissed me. It was soft, tentative, like he was asking permission even as he did it. I kissed him back, my hands finding the sides of his face, and for just a moment, the whole world narrowed down to just us, just that perfect, terrifying moment of connection. When we broke apart, David looked scared. "I'm sorry," he started to say, but I interrupted him. "Don't be sorry. Please don't be sorry." But what happened next would test everything we were building together. 3 days later, everything almost fell apart. I arrived at David's house to find all the curtains drawn tight again, and no answer when I knocked on the door. I could hear classical music playing loudly inside, which was unusual. David usually preferred silence or very soft background music. I tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Worried, I used the spare key he'd recently given me, a gesture that felt monumental for someone who guarded his privacy so carefully. I found David in his living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes and paintings pulled down from the walls. He was sitting on the floor, hands shaking, staring at a letter in his lap. "David, what's happening?" He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I have to go." "What do you mean you have to go?" He held up the letter. "The university. They're permanently terminating my position, and they need me to come in to sign papers and clear out my office. If I don't go by Friday, I forfeit my severance and my health insurance." I knelt down beside him. "Okay, so we'll figure out." David laughed bitterly. "Marcus, I can't even go to the mailbox without having a panic attack. How am I supposed to go to campus, face all my former colleagues, sit in meetings about my failure?" "You didn't fail," I said firmly. "You got sick. There's a difference." Tell that to Sarah. Tell that to everyone who watched me fall apart. David's breathing was getting faster, shallower. I thought maybe I was getting better. Maybe I could actually have something good in my life again. But I was just kidding myself. I could see him spiraling, and I knew I had to do something. "David, look at me." I took his hands in mine. "Breathe with me. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4, out for 4. We breathed together until his panic started to subside. "What if I came with you?" I said. "What?" "To the university. What if I drove you there, waited for you, drove you back? You wouldn't have to do it alone." David stared at me. "You would do that?" "David, I'd do anything for you. Don't you know that by now?" That night, we made a plan that would change everything. Friday morning arrived faster than either of us wanted. David barely slept the night before. I knew because he texted me at 3 a.m., then 4 a.m., then 5 a.m., each message just saying can't sleep. I drove over early and found him pacing his kitchen, fully dressed but clearly terrified. "We don't have to do this," I told him. "The money isn't worth your health." "Yes, it is," David said. "Not the money, but if I don't do this, I'll never do anything. I'll live in this house for the rest of my life, and I'll waste whatever we have together." He said, "Whatever we have together," like it was precious, worth fighting for. The drive to campus took 45 minutes. For the first 20, David sat rigid in the passenger seat, hands clenched in his lap, breathing carefully controlled. But then something shifted. "Can you tell me about your corporate job?" he asked suddenly. "The one you burn out from?" I glanced at him, understanding. He needed distraction. So I told him about the 60-hour weeks, the impossible deadlines, the boss who screamed at people in meetings. I told him about the morning I woke up and literally couldn't force myself to get dressed for work, how I sat on my bedroom floor and cried because I felt so trapped. "What changed your mind?" "About leaving?" David asked. I realized that being scared of being poor was less terrifying than being certain I was wasting my life. I said, "And honestly, best decision I ever made. Not just because I'm happier, but because if I hadn't left that job, I never would have started the landscaping business. And if I hadn't started the landscaping business, we never would have met," David finished quietly. Exactly. By the time we reached campus, David was still nervous, but he was also determined. The meeting with the university administrators lasted 2 hours. I waited in the parking lot, checking my phone every 5 minutes, ready to run inside if David needed me. But when he finally emerged, he looked exhausted but proud. "How did it go?" I asked as he got back in the truck. "Better than I expected," David said. Turns out, several of my former colleagues have been dealing with their own mental health struggles since the pandemic. The department chair actually asked if I consider doing some online consulting work for them once I'm feeling better. "That's amazing, Marcus," David said as we pulled out of the parking lot. "Yeah, I want to try to go to the grocery store." I almost swerved off the road. "Are you sure?" "No," David admitted, "but I want to try anyway." With you, our first grocery store trip lasted exactly 12 minutes, just long enough to buy ingredients for dinner. David had to step outside twice to breathe, but he did it. He picked out vegetables and pasta, and even splurged on expensive chocolate for dessert. I can't believe I just did that, he said as we loaded the groceries into the truck. I can, I said. You're braver than you think you are. That night, as we cooked dinner together in David's kitchen, I realized something had fundamentally changed between us. 6 weeks later, our life together had found a rhythm I never could have imagined. David still had hard days, days when anxiety was too much, when leaving the house felt impossible. But he also had good days, days when we'd take short walks around the neighborhood or sit in the front yard instead of just the back garden. He started painting again, beautiful canvases full of color and life that replaced the darker pieces that had filled his house. I started spending most evenings at David's place, cooking together, watching movies, talking until late into the night. We were taking things slow physically. David needed time to trust that I wouldn't leave when things got difficult. But the emotional intimacy between us grew deeper every day. I love you, I told him one evening as we sat in the garden I created, now in full bloom with summer flowers. David turned to me, eyes soft in the fading light. I love you too. And Marcus? I never thought I'd be able to say that to someone again. But loving someone with anxiety meant learning how to be supportive without being protective, helpful without being controlling. When David decided he wanted to try going to a small cafe downtown, his first time in a restaurant since his breakdown, I waited while he changed his mind 3 times about what to wear, packed and unpacked a bag of emergency items twice, and had a 10-minute panic attack in the car outside the restaurant. We can go home, I said for the 3rd time. No, David said firmly. I want to do this. I want to have coffee with you somewhere that isn't my kitchen. We stayed for an hour. David kept his back to the wall and his jacket on the entire time, but he ordered a latte and a piece of cake, and he smiled at the waitress when she brought our check. It was a small victory that felt enormous. How do you do it? David asked as we walked slowly back to the car. Do what? Stay patient with me. Never make me feel like I'm broken or too much work. I stopped walking and turned to face him on the sidewalk. David, loving you isn't work. Watching you fight for yourself, for us, seeing you get a little braver every day, it's the most incredible thing I've ever been part of. You're not broken. You're healing. And that's when I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life helping him heal. 8 months after that first day I mowed David's lawn, I asked him to marry me. It wasn't planned. We were working together in the garden. David had become genuinely helpful with the planting and weeding, and he loved the physical work. When he suddenly sat back on his heels and said, I can't believe this is my life now. What do you mean? I asked, looking up from the tomato plants I was staking. You, being outside without panic attacks, having someone to cook for, waking up excited about the day instead of dreading it. David looked around the garden, then at me. A year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never trust anyone enough to let them really know me. I set down my gardening tools and moved closer to him. And now I can't imagine my life without you in it. David's voice was quiet but certain. You saved me, Marcus. Not just from anxiety, but from giving up on myself. That's when I said it, without thinking, without planning, just with pure love and certainty. Marry me. David blinked. What? Marry me. I said again more confidently. I know we haven't talked about it. I know I don't have a ring. I know this isn't romantic or planned. But David, I want to spend the rest of my life in gardens with you. I want to be there for every breakthrough and every setback. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. David stared at me for so long I started to worry I'd moved too fast, pushed too hard. But then tears started running down his cheeks. Is that a yes? I asked hopefully. That's a yes, David whispered. That's absolutely, completely, forever a yes. We were both crying and laughing as I pulled him into my arms there in the middle of the garden, surrounded by the flowers we'd planted together. I love you so much it scares me sometimes, David said against my shoulder. Good scared or bad scared? I asked. Good scared. The kind of scared that means something matters. We got married 6 months later in David's backyard. It was small, just David's parents, who flew in from Oregon, my sister and her family, and a few close friends. David's former department chair came, along with two of his old colleagues who had become genuine friends during his recovery. Even Sarah sent a card with a note that said, "I'm glad you found someone who loves you exactly as you are." David wore a navy blue suit and I wore gray, and we exchanged vows under an arch I'd built out of branches from the maple tree in his front yard, covered in climbing roses that David had helped me plant. "Marcus," David said, reading from a piece of paper with hands that barely shook, "you saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. You loved me when I couldn't leave this house, when I couldn't imagine a future, when I was afraid of everything, including my own shadow. You taught me that healing doesn't mean becoming who I used to be. It means becoming who I'm supposed to be, and who I'm supposed to be is yours." I barely made it through my own vows without crying. "David, the first day I saw you behind those curtains, I knew you were hiding something precious. I just didn't know it would be the rest of my life. You taught me that real love isn't about finding someone who doesn't have problems. It's about finding someone whose problems you want to help solve, whose growth you want to be part of, whose hand you want to hold through whatever comes next." Our first dance was to At Last by Etta James, right there in the garden, with string lights I'd hung earlier that week creating our dance floor. David was nervous about dancing in front of people, but he held me close and whispered, "I can't believe this is real," halfway through the song. "It's real," I whispered back. "We're real." The best part of the whole day was watching David laugh and talk with our guests, seeing him not just surviving, but thriving in a social situation. 2 years later. Today, David and I run the landscaping business together. He handles the design consultations and the client communications. It turns out that someone who understands anxiety is incredibly good at working with nervous first-time clients. I do most of the physical labor, though David insists on helping with the planting, because he says it keeps him grounded. David still has hard days. Anxiety doesn't just disappear because you fall in love. But now when he has a panic attack or a day when leaving the house feels impossible, he knows he's not facing alone. And I've learned that loving someone with mental health challenges doesn't mean fixing them. It means standing beside them while they do the hard work of healing themselves. We're talking about adopting a dog. David says he's ready for that kind of responsibility, that kind of joy. We're also talking about kids, maybe in a year or two when David feels more stable. Do you ever regret it? David asked me last week as we sat in our garden. It's definitely our garden now, full of plants we've chosen together over 2 years of seasons. Regret what? Taking on someone like me, someone with baggage and limitations and bad days. I turn to look at him, this man I love more every day, who still sometimes doubts that he's worth the love I give him freely. "David, you want to know what I regret?" He nodded. "I regret that it took me 32 years to find you. I regret every day before I knew you existed. But choosing you, loving you, being part of your healing, and letting you be part of mine, that's the best decision I've ever made." And as the sun set over the garden we built together, I knew that every day for the rest of our lives, I'd make that same choice all over again. Thank you for joining me on Marcus and David's journey. Their story reminds us that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections fit perfectly with yours. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Have you ever been part of someone's healing journey? Or has someone been part of yours? Your stories matter too. If you enjoyed this slow burn romance, there are so many more stories like this one waiting for you on this channel. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new story, and ring the notification bell to be the first to know when I upload. What kind of love story would you like to hear next? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, remember that everyone deserves a love story, and yours might be just around the corner.